Welcome to this video explaining 100 logical fallacies. We will learn how to spot flawed reasoning in everyday arguments, helping you to think clearly and argue effectively. A logical fallacy is an argument that sounds convincing but is actually flawed. They are like bugs in our brain software that lead to unsupported conclusions. Recognizing these traps is essential for intellectual self-defense and communicating honestly. We will categorize the fallacies into 6 main groups, including fallacies of relevance, weak induction, presumption, formal fallacies, ambiguity, and rhetorical tactics. Here's a quick checklist for analyzing arguments. Are emotions being manipulated? Is the claim supported by relevant evidence? Is simple correlation mistaken for causation? Keep this in mind when evaluating claims. We begin with Category 1, fallacies of relevance, often known as attacks and appeals. These arguments distract from the main point using emotion or irrelevant information. Fallacy number 1 is ad hominem, or attack the person. This involves attacking the character or personal traits of the opponent rather than engaging with their argument, because a person's character does not affect the validity of their point. Fallacy number 2 is the straw man. This involves misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack or refute. It addresses a distorted version of the position, leaving the actual point unrefuted. Fallacy number 3 is the slippery slope, or the domino effect. This asserts that a small first step will inevitably lead to a chain of negative events without providing logical proof for the causal chain. Fallacy number 4 is the appeal to authority. This asserts that something is true simply because an authority figure said it, even if the authority is irrelevant to the subject. Fallacy number 5 is the appeal to the people. This claims something is correct because the majority believes or does it. However, popularity does not equate to truth or correctness. Fallacy number 6 is the appeal to emotion. This manipulates an emotional response in place of a valid or compelling argument. Emotions are not valid evidence for a claim's truth. Fallacy number 7 is the appeal to pity. This attempts to induce pity or guilt, substituting emotion for evidence. Emotional circumstances are irrelevant to the truth of an argument's conclusion. Fallacy number 8 is the appeal to fear. This uses deception to increase fear and prejudice toward an opponent. It bypasses logic, causing acceptance based on fear of negative consequences rather than evidence. Fallacy number 9 is the appeal to flattery. This uses excessive praise to obtain compliance. Flattery appeals to vanity, but the truth of a claim is independent of the listener's personal qualities. Fallacy number 10 is the appeal to novelty. This claims an idea is superior solely because it is new or modern. The age of an idea has no bearing on its truth or quality. Fallacy number 11 is the appeal to tradition. This asserts something is right because it has always been done that way. Tradition alone is not evidence of validity, as circumstances change. Fallacy number 12 is the appeal to ignorance. This argues a proposition is true because it hasn't been proven false. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Not knowing something isn't false doesn't make it true. Fallacy number 13 is the red herring. This redirects the argument to another issue the speaker can better address. It distracts from the original topic, leaving it unresolved. Fallacy number 14 is the genetic fallacy. This judges something based on its origin or source. The origin of a claim is logically irrelevant to its current truth or merit. Fallacy number 15 is poisoning the well. This preemptively discredits a target by presenting adverse information. It biases the audience against the speaker before they present their argument. Fallacy number 16 is guilt by association. This attacks an argument by linking the proponent to a demonized group. Sharing an attribute with a negative group does not invalidate an argument. Fallacy number 17 is the appeal to force. This uses coercion or the threat of force as justification for a conclusion. Threats do not constitute logical evidence for a claim's truth. Fallacy number 18 is bulverism, or psychological dismissal. This dismisses an argument by pointing out the psychological reason why the opponent made it, rather than addressing the argument's truth. Fallacy number 19 is chronological snobbery. This thinks the thought of an earlier time is inherently inferior to the present. The age of an idea has no bearing on its validity. Fallacy number 20 is ipse dixit, or he said it. This relies solely on the speaker's authority to validate a dogmatic statement, bypassing the need for evidence or reasoning. Next is Category 2, fallacies of weak induction, often called bad evidence. These are arguments where the premises are too weak to support the conclusion. Fallacy number 21 is hasty generalization. This makes a rushed conclusion without considering all variables or having a large enough sample size, leading to inaccurate assumptions. Fallacy number 22 is false cause. This presumes that a relationship between things means one is the cause of the other. Correlation does not imply causation. It could be coincidence. Fallacy number 23 is the common cause fallacy. This mistakes two co-occurring effects for a direct cause and effect relationship, ignoring the underlying third root cause. Fallacy number 24 is causal oversimplification. This identifies a single cause for a complex event when multiple causes are responsible. Complex events rarely have only one trigger. Fallacy number 25 is the gambler's fallacy. This believes that runs occur to statistically independent events, like coin flips. Independent events are not influenced by previous outcomes. Fallacy number 26 is weak analogy. This compares two things not truly comparable in relevant aspects. If the differences outweigh the similarities, the argument fails. Fallacy number 27 is argument from silence. This draws a conclusion from the absence of statements in historical documents. Records may be incomplete, lost, or the information was deemed unimportant. Fallacy number 28 is appeal to probability. This takes something for granted because it would probably be the case. Possibility is not the same as probability, and probability is not certainty. Fallacy number 29 is false precision. This uses meaningless numbers to create an illusion of strict accuracy or scientific validity, misleading the audience into trusting the data. Fallacy number 30 is argument from anecdote. This uses personal experience or an isolated example instead of sound argument or compelling evidence. A single example does not disprove statistical trends. Fallacy number 31 is the spotlight fallacy. This assumes that the most visible members of a group are representative of the whole. Highly visible events are often the exception, not the rule. Now we move to category 3, fallacies of presumption, or bad assumptions. These arguments are based on hidden, unproven, or false assumptions. Fallacy number 32 is begging the question, or circular reasoning. The argument assumes the conclusion in one of the premises, relying on the thing it is trying to prove as evidence for itself. Fallacy number 33 is the complex question or loaded question. This asks a question with an unproven presumption built in, forcing the respondent to implicitly accept a hidden premise. Fallacy number 34 is false dichotomy, presenting only two alternatives as the only possibilities when more options actually exist. This forces an artificial choice between two extremes. Fallacy number 35 is the burden of proof. This claims that the responsibility to disprove a claim lies with the opponent, not the person making the assertion. The claimant must provide evidence. Fallacy number 36 is question-begging epithet. This uses biased or emotional language to support an unproven conclusion, effectively smuggling the conclusion into the description of the subject. Fallacy number 37 is the fallacy of accent. This changes the meaning of a sentence by shifting emphasis to different words, which can lead to misinterpretation of the original intent. Fallacy number 38 is the nirvana fallacy. This dismisses a realistic solution because it is not ideal or perfect. Rejecting meaningful progress because it isn't flawless prevents improvement. We continue our discussion on logical fallacies with Category 3, presumption. The continuum fallacy, or sorites, involves rejecting a claim because it lacks precision, or arguing that two distinct states are the same due to a gray area between them. The trivial objection, also known as nitpicking, attacks a weak or irrelevant point of an argument while ignoring the main substance. This is flawed because focusing on minor details distracts from the core evidence. Wishful thinking is forming conclusions based on what you desire, rather than evidence or reality. The universe does not align with our desires, and believing something because you want it to be true ignores objective facts. We now move to Category 1V formal fallacies, which are errors in the structural logic of the argument itself, also known as broken logic. Affirming the consequent is an error where if the result or consequent is true, the cause or antecedent is assumed to be true as well. This is flawed because the result could have been triggered by other causes. Denying the antecedent is the formal logic error where, if the premise is false, the conclusion is assumed to be false. However, the consequent can often be caused by things other than the antecedent. The undistributed middle is a syllogistic error where the middle term, shared by both premises, does not refer to all members of the class in at least one premise. Sharing a common property doesn't make two things identical. The quantifier shift is an error where the scope of quantifiers like all or some is illicitly switched. This assumes a relationship applicable to every individual implies a single entity related to the entire group. Illicit major is a formal fallacy where the major term is undistributed in the premise, but distributed in the conclusion. The logic fails when the conclusion makes a claim about all members of a group based on a premise that only covers some members. Non sequitur means it does not follow. The conclusion does not logically follow from the previous argument. This creates a gap in logic by assuming a connection that has not been established by the premises. We move on to Category 5. Fallacies of ambiguity, which rely on confusion caused by double meanings or grammar, often referred to as wordplay. Equivocation uses an ambiguous term in more than one sense, making the argument misleading. This creates a shift in meaning, where a key word is used differently in the premise versus the conclusion. Amphiboly, or grammatical ambiguity, results from confusing sentence structure. The flawed syntax allows for multiple valid interpretations, leading to uncertainty about the intended meaning. The fallacy of composition infers that something true of a part must be true of the whole. This is flawed because a whole system often has properties different from its individual components. Conversely, the fallacy of division infers that something true of the whole must be true of its parts. Attributes of a whole do not necessarily distribute to every individual component. Reification, or hypostatization, treats an abstract concept as if it were a real, concrete thing or person. This obscures the actual people or causes involved, as abstracts lack consciousness and agency. Proof by intimidation asserts a conclusion in a way that bullies the listener into agreement, often by implying stupidity if they disagree. This substitutes social pressure for logical evidence. The argument from the negative claims that, because a specific rule doesn't forbid an action, the action is permitted. The absence of a prohibition does not equal explicit permission. Our final category is Category 6, Rhetorical and Psychological Tactics, which uses tricks and manipulation to win arguments without logic, often by exploiting emotions or cognitive biases. Motivated reasoning uses emotionally biased reasoning to produce justifications that are most desired. It's flawed because facts should dictate beliefs, not desires. The bandwagon fallacy assumes something is correct simply because others are doing it. Popularity does not equate to validity, and trends are often driven by social pressure. Pious fraud, or deception for a good cause, uses a lie to convince an audience of a moral argument. Even if the goal is noble, using falsehoods undermines trust and substitutes manipulation for reason. Tu quoque, or you too, avoids engaging with criticism by turning it back on the accuser. Hypocrisy does not invalidate an argument's logic. Ad hominem abusive is a personal insult used to distract from the argument. Name-calling is not a valid counter-argument. Personal traits are irrelevant to the truth of a claim. Style over substance pays more attention to the presentation, such as confidence and eloquence, than to the facts. Confidence is not an indicator of truth. A polished lie is still a lie. Ad odium, or appeal to spite, exploits existing bitterness to distract from valid points. Personal feelings of hatred or resentment are irrelevant to the logical validity of an idea. Ad lazarum, or appeal to poverty, assumes someone is more virtuous or wise because they are poor. Financial status is not a reliable indicator of moral character or truth. Ad criminem, or appeal to wealth, assumes that because someone is rich, they are more intelligent or correct. Financial success does not equate to expertise in unrelated fields or factual correctness. Moving the goalposts, or shifting standards, demands more evidence or changes the criteria for proof after the initial burden has been met. This makes the argument impossible to win. The subjectivist fallacy, or relativism, claims an objective fact is true for one person but not for others. Objective reality is not subject to personal preference. Special pleading involves moving the goalposts or making up exceptions when a claim is shown to be false. This applies a double standard, where rules apply to everyone else but not the speaker. Appeal to extremes erroneously attempts to make a reasonable argument absurd by exaggerating it. It misrepresents the original claim by ignoring nuance or middle ground. Confirmation bias is the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. This prevents objective analysis. The incredulity fallacy, or argument from incredulity, asserts that because a premise is difficult to understand, it must be false. The truth depends on evidence and logic, not comprehension. Appeal to common sense asserts a conclusion needs no evidence because it is obvious. Common sense is subjective and cannot substitute for empirical evidence. Base rate neglect focuses on vivid, specific information while ignoring general statistics. This leads to poor probability judgments by allowing anecdotes to override statistical reality. The middle ground fallacy asserts the truth must be a compromise between two opposite positions. The truth is not necessarily the average of two viewpoints. One side may be completely correct. The definist fallacy defines a term to make defending a position easier, creating a circular argument. It bypasses the actual debate by setting up a definition that predetermines the outcome. Hypothesis contrary to fact offers a poorly supported claim about what might have happened if circumstances were different. This treats a hypothetical situation as a certainty, ignoring complex causal chains. The historian's fallacy judges past decisions based on information only available later. It relies on hindsight bias, assuming that future outcomes were known or predictable at the time. The moralistic fallacy, also known as the reverse naturalistic fallacy, assumes the world is as it should be, or that moral desires dictate factual reality. The way the world ought to work is not necessarily how it actually works. The naturalistic fallacy claims that because something is natural, it is inherently good or right. This is flawed because nature is indifferent to human values, and many natural things are harmful. The etymological fallacy, or history versus usage, reasons that the original meaning of a word is similar to its current use. Language evolves, and current definitions are determined by present-day usage, not historical roots. Appeal to closure accepts a conclusion simply because it provides a sense of finality, regardless of evidence. Psychological comfort does not make an answer true. Sometimes, we don't know is the only honest conclusion. The self-sealing argument is a claim constructed to dismiss all criticism as proof of the claim itself. This creates a closed logical loop that makes the claim impossible to test or falsify, rendering it logically empty. The 81st fallacy is the appeal to the stone, which dismisses an argument as absurd without providing proof of its absurdity. Asserting that a claim is ridiculous is just an opinion, not a logical refutation. The fallacy of the beard, also called the line-drawing fallacy, rejects the difference between two things, because there is no precise line where one becomes the other. The lack of a distinct dividing line does not negate the difference between the two extremes. Misplaced concreteness is mistaking an abstract belief or concept for a concrete reality. This is flawed because abstractions and metrics are just representations, not the physical reality itself. Treating them as reality can lead to flawed judgments. The appeal to money assumes that cost equates to value or quality, meaning expensive things must be good and cheap things must be bad. However, price is often driven by marketing and supply/demand, not objective quality. Shifting the burden requires the skeptic to disprove a claim, rather than the claimant providing proof. The obligation to provide evidence lies with the person making the positive claim. An inability to disprove something is not evidence of its truth. Proof by assertion involves repeatedly restating a conclusion instead of providing evidence. This is flawed because repetition does not increase the truth value of a claim, it simply creates an illusory truth effect. Appeal to spite attempts to win favor for an argument by exploiting feelings of bitterness or schadenfreude. Emotional reactions like holding a grudge are irrelevant to the logical validity of the argument itself. The appeal to nature argues that because something is natural, it is therefore valid or ideal. This is flawed because natural is not synonymous with good, as many natural things are harmful, and unnatural things like medicine can be good. The Texas sharpshooter, or cherry-picking data, involves finding a pattern to fit a presumption after the fact. It ignores the randomness of the larger data set and claims significance where none was predicted. The no true Scotsman fallacy attempts to retain an assertion by shifting the definition of a term to exclude a counterexample. This renders a claim unfalsifiable, as the speaker arbitrarily redefines terms to protect their belief. The broken window fallacy, an economic fallacy, ignores opportunity costs by assuming destruction creates a net economic benefit through repairs. It fails to account for what the money would have been spent on otherwise, the unseen loss. The ludic fallacy mistakes the map for the territory, assuming that statistical models perfectly represent complex real-world reality, especially games of chance. Real-life complexity involves unknown unknowns that tidy models cannot account for. The regression fallacy attributes a cause to an event that is actually just a statistical fluctuation returning to the mean or average. This mistakes natural variance for a causal relationship, as extreme performance is usually followed by average performance regardless of intervention. The association fallacy asserts that qualities of one group are inherently qualities of another due to an inconsequential association. Sharing a trivial characteristic does not imply shared values or guilt, falsely equating distinct groups. The decision point fallacy argues that because a precise line cannot be drawn at a specific point, there is no difference between two extremes. A gradual transition does not negate the existence of distinct states at either end of the spectrum. The sunk cost fallacy reasons that further investment is warranted because resources already spent will otherwise be lost. Future decisions should be based on future costs and benefits, not unrecoverable past losses. The McNamara fallacy makes decisions based solely on measurable metrics while ignoring crucial factors that are hard to quantify. Not everything that counts can be counted, and ignoring qualitative factors leads to an incomplete view of reality. The mind projection fallacy assumes that the way you see the world reflects the way the world really is. It confuses mental models or imagination with external reality, meaning intuitive concepts are not necessarily objectively true. The psychologist's fallacy occurs when an observer presumes the objectivity of their own perspective when analyzing behavior. This mistakes subjective interpretation for objective truth, failing to account for the observer's biases. The fallacy of relative privation dismisses a complaint due to the existence of more important global problems. The existence of a worse problem does not invalidate the current issue. We can address multiple problems simultaneously. The definitions and examples used in this video are adapted from the primary source, 100 Logical Fallacies Explained with Examples, by Melvin and informed by academic logic to serve as a comprehensive reference guide. Critical thinking is about understanding, not winning. By recognizing these fallacies, you inoculate yourself against manipulation and improve your ability to communicate the truth. Always demand evidence, check emotions, trace the cause, and argue the best case.